Mao rolled up to Blister Hill like a meatball at a spaghetti party. He was greeted at the steps by an armored, mustached man who looked like he belonged to a 70s Southern rock group that just came back from the Renaissance Fair. Apparently he wasn't a drummer, but more of an inspector type. His job was to check people as they entered the city to make sure they didn't have any heretical items. You know, standard religious freak stuff. Mao wasn't really sure what to do since he didn't know whether he had any such items. He didn't have any porno or anything, but he did have some grog and items plundered from dead bandits. He tried to stall, but this guy was insistent. Mao didn't know who this evil narco was, but he knew that some standard eugenicist purity talk would usually satisfy this sort, so he tried one last time to avoid a search. No luck. This man wanted submission, and Mao reluctantly complied. It's not that he objected to religion or to submitting to authority or anything like that. Mao really didn't have any principles at all, except for one. Avoid getting beat up and killed, because those hurt a lot. Before he knew it, the search was over. Apparently he was clean. Whew. Now that guard can go back to being a drunk uncle at somebody's barbecue. Relieved, Mao rolled into Blister Hill. It looked nice. He wandered into the first building he could see. His plan was to live nearby, so these were future neighbors. Better make a good impression. A rooftop party. Perfect. Mao had never actually been to a rooftop party, but he felt confident that he was the kind of guy who would excel at one. Oh, a holy priest. Unexpected. Though I guess they need to let off some holy steam from time to time, too. Time to make some small talk that will really impress this guy. Mao considered going the aggressive route, but he figured he should play it cool for now. Love and devotion to Okran. For that little display, Mao secured some divine blessings and made his way out. He popped into his shed that was just outside. Oops! Interrupted dinner. Better head to the bar to see what the cool guy scene is like here. Oh, maybe a friend. Dang it. So expensive. Mao visited some other shops briefly to get the lay of the land, but it was time to make a proper camp. Boy, finding a spot won't be easy. Maybe over by that rickety old rusty piece of garbage. Nah, too trashy. Mao made his way closer to the river. He didn't want to trespass on mermaid territory, but he was also terribly curious to try and see one. What about over by this bridge? Maybe he could wave hello to everyone who passed by, try to be a source of positivity around the neighborhood. Good access to the river. He did a quick prospecting task somehow and can see that the area was very fertile and hydrated. And so he made camp. It'd be a little rough going at first until he could get a roof over his head, but a sleeping bag and a campfire sounded nice. Next, he laid down the plans for his very own shed, just like the ones that he had been stealing from. Unfortunately, he realized he couldn't actually build a shack with his bowl of rice and random junk. He needed to get his hands on some building materials. Back to Blister Hill, Rocky style. He was already starting to feel like he belonged and strode through the gates like a proper resident. He headed right into the bar. A holy barman. Don't see that very often. He didn't have any building materials, but he did have a cool book called A Holy Purpose. That could be fun. Mao was having a hard time finding building materials, but he did happen upon a cool building with flame decals. Inside, there were some Stormtrooper-ass looking dudes. The one guy sitting on the big chair must be important. Mao thought it would be polite to introduce himself. The guy who was apparently the Holy Phoenix wouldn't even look at him. Way too cool, apparently. His hype man on the left spoke instead. Looks like you gotta do something cool to enter the club. Mao had experience in blood, sweat, and tears, but not so much with purging. He'd have to look into this. Continuing his way around town, he stumbled into the Inquisitor. Oh, maybe he had some work for Mao, so he could then talk to Phoenix and dress like a stormtrooper. Mao inquisited the Inquisitor. Alright, escorting marked heretics. That's not a bad way to spend one's time, really. Mao told him he'd keep an eye out and trundled off. Overall, Mao wasn't super thrilled about landing in a town full of religious zealots, but on the other hand, it did simplify things. Since Mao didn't really care what he believed, he could just be pious as hell, Be a true believer, and they'd accept him. He could play that game. Finally, he found some building materials to build his shack and headed back out. He got to work, filled with hope, and dare I say, pride. Just then, Mao felt an overwhelming sense of dread. There was a bone dog nearby, and it was headed right towards him. Oh, hell no, he thought. Every limb he had ached with a phantom but still corporeal pain, as if they somehow knew what the bone dog would do to him if it got a chance. Mao ran to the river like a little baby. Oh no, the bone dog brought friends. They better not pee on his shack. Bone dog sauntered up to the shed. It thought it had caught a whiff of meatball, but it didn't look like there was anything here. Crappy shed, too. Thankfully, all the creatures passed by, so Mao got back to work. Ah, dang it. It needed more building materials. Back to Blister Hill, back to hauling. Was this what his life was going to be? Shuttling back and forth between a town of religious nutjobs and a crappy shed next to a river which had yet to show any signs of mermaids? Sure seemed that way. But just then, Mao found a dying, escaped servant on the ground. He wasn't doing very well, and he didn't have much stuff. There was only one thing to do, and Mao picked him up and headed to town, so he could take him straight to the Inquisitor. Surely they'd be happy to see an escaped servant returned for proper punishment. Maybe then Phoenix would talk to Mao and let him dress like a stormtrooper. Mao strode up to the cool guys in the front gate gang, thinking they might have some interest in the escaped servant. But I guess they had seen this sort of thing 1,000 times and hardly seemed to notice. Mao then made his way to the Inquisitor's office. Dang it, he wasn't there. I guess 6 a.m. is a bit early for this sort of thing. No one seemed to pay any attention to Mao, or the dying escaped servant on his back. He noticed that there were some cages in the other room. Maybe he could just plop this servant down, and then he could chat with the Inquisitor about it later. Mao wasn't a bad guy, so he didn't take the servant's clothes or anything, and he locked the cage and walked away. Look at that, great timing, the Inquisitor just showed up for work. But not only did he ignore Mao's attempts to talk about the servant, he seemingly forgot that he had already had this conversation with Mao yesterday. Darn. It was a good try, though. So Mao grabbed more building materials and headed back out. He still wasn't sure what to make of his strange existence, but he did know that it was better to be hauling building materials than it was to be dying in a cage. Mao's mind drifted along as he trudged back to camp, until it settled on this one question that he just couldn't shake. Do you think Phoenix is hot? I bet he is.